Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to this Stargazing Spring Equinox webinar. The Spring Equinox of 2025 is like another initiation point of the year. And I'm calling this one Magical Astrology. And you can see I've changed the format a little bit. And yeah, it felt right for this initiating energy that comes at the spring equinox. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this presentation. If you Google the time for the spring equinox, it comes up as 0901 GMT, which is on the 20th of March this year. But when I put that time into the program that I use, it was still at the end of Pisces, so just 1 minute away from the actual point of the spring equinox as the sun moves into Aries, into 0 degrees of Aries. But I thought, actually, this is still a very interesting point to look at, because we know we've got this grouping of planets with the North Node right up there around the 11th house. And there's several things that are interesting about this chart. And I'm going to go into them in the next slide. But I just wanted you to look at what stands out. What is it that we need to be really looking at in this chart? So for me, that grouping around the 11th house, really jumps out. There's significance about the 11th house. The 11th house is all about groups and communities of like-minded people. And look at it, we've got 5 planets and the North Node around that 11th house. They're all focused on community. It's just a bit mind-boggling, really, when that's what we've been talking about, or it's what I've been talking about for the last few weeks. And with Pluto in Aquarius, it's all about community. So there's this huge focus there on the 11th house and community. But in this chart, it's not really finding its expression. That's what we're looking at, is that point of Aries. And we've got Saturn, Node, and Neptune all in Pisces, and Mercury and Venus in Aries, and the Sun is making its transition from that Pisces grouping and into the Aries grouping. So it's like a really significant point. If you follow my daily astrology tips, we've been working with this division of this energy for quite a few weeks since Mercury and Venus went into Aries. And then we can see that this forms a very dominant corner on a blue triangle, a small blue triangle that points to Pluto in Aquarius. If you don't know what these names and symbols are, don't worry about it. I'm going to highlight them again in the next slide. Just listen to the words for now. And a blue triangle, stands out because that is an ease and a flow. And in fact, when we look at the chart, we go, oh, actually, do you know what? This chart is virtually all blue. There's only one red aspect and there's no green. So this is a very blue chart. And this is, again, we've been having a lot of charts recently that have been these ambivalent charts of just blue and red without the green. And so, that's another, really interesting factor. And what is that opposition? Oh, Jupiter opposite the moon. We had Pluto opposite the moon a few days ago in this chart that looked really similar to this. So Jupiter, in fact, is virtually out on its own, isn't it? It's got that dotted line going to the moon, which means that although Jupiter sits within the orbit of the moon doesn't sit within the orbit of Jupiter. So Jupiter is almost unaspected, and we're going to have to work to actually make that connection work. So Jupiter, you know, it's been in Gemini for quite a while now, and it's got a while to go. It's halfway through. And it's right behind the ascendant. You know, that makes us a very significant position in terms of how we see ourselves and how we see our abilities to communicate in Gemini. So, Pluto in the ninth house. You know, Pluto's about the will of God. The ninth house is about our spirituality. And then if we look at the house that we normally associate with spirituality, the 12th house, we've got Uranus there in Taurus. We're like, okay, so changes now in our spiritualities, our values, and our thinking. Mars is still in Cancer, obviously, this sort of like this urge that we have to care. I mean, blimey, you can't say people don't care at the moment. It's just they all care about different things. And right at the end of the second house, you know, something to do with our security, but it's not in a strong position in the house, so it feels a bit uncomfortable, a bit wobbly, not quite sure what's going on, what's who to fight for. And only interacting with the rest of the chart through Saturn. So feeling a bit like, I need to organize something, but I'm not quite sure what I need to organize. And then finally, at the other point of that blue triangle is the moon. Moon in Sagittarius, passionate, fiery, and it's at the opening of the cave. You know, the DC is the entrance to the cave. It's the first planet we meet when we meet this chart. Is that moon in Sagittarius, gung ho, fine. I'm with my bow and arrow on my horse, and I'm just galloping in there, and you know, all guns blazing, or at least all flags waving. Let's put it that way. Maybe protesting. And very heartfelt, very passionate, you know. And of course, you know, we're going to be with this Pluto in Aquarius for a very long time still, you know, another 20 years. It's only just getting going. And in fact, however, it has got through at a fair good speed at the moment. Excuse my close up for a minute. I mean, Pluto is almost at 4 degrees of Aquarius right now. You know, it's chuntering on, it's starting to have an impact. And, you know, we're seeing that in increasing technology. We're seeing, you know, like, let's just take over the whole system's functioning with technology, put it all on a computer, and we don't need the people anymore. And Aquarius has a bit of that, you know, that sort of going in there without really considering, and it's weird because, you know, Aquarius is very much about the group, it's about the community. So it's a bit odd that, you know, they've not been consulted, you know, that the group and the community, they need to be consulted. We need to be working more from bottom down decisions going up. Very much like how Extinction Rebellion used to teach. But, you know, it's Pluto and it has to go through the shit as well as the good stuff. And the best that we can do is always ask, where's the best place for me to be? Where do I need to be? What do I need to be doing? How do I need to be contributing? And particularly, how do I need to be contributing to community? This is a massive thing going on at the moment. So we've had a quick whiz around the chart. Let's now really focus in on these planets more specifically, and how using a different time just shifts them. So because I didn't know what time the spring equinox was, didn't bring it with me, I started off by going into my own astrology program I use that gives me free charts, and just narrowing it down until the time that I came to was at 0 degrees Aries, 0, was actually anywhere between 0902 and 0913. Now, that happens because after, we start with the degrees, there's the first zero, and then the second zero is the minutes, but there are also seconds. So basically, it was from 0902 to 0913. So basically, it took 11 minutes of clock time to cover 1 minute of sidereal time, star time is what we call it. But that's a very interesting little time zone because that's all 0 degrees Aries, really. However, the actual initiating 0 degrees Aries was 0902. And I'm not going to look at that chart because honestly, it would be exactly the same as the 0901 that we just looked at. But I wanted to look at the 0913 because this looks, when you first look at it, it looks exactly the same. But there are huge significant differences going on in this chart. It's like just that shift, that tweak, just that little tweak, that little shift has brought all these planets into a very different energy alignment, a very different way of being able to express themselves. And this, for me, is the magic of astrology. That just this little tweak can suddenly bring something into a more of an alignment of, or that's if we're looking for a particular time to start something or to do something. But when we actually look at the course of events that are going on, and we look at, well, that happened in that moment, and then 10 minutes later, the chart looked like this. And then you look at this shift that can actually occur in the material world during that time. And sometimes you go, whoa, that feels really magical. And for me, this feels really magical. So I'm not going to go through all the planets again, because in the loosest sense, they're not significantly different to what they were in the 0901 chart. However, at a subtle level, they are very different. So let's have a look at this 0901 chart again. And first of all, I want you to look at the red circle. And what you'll see is that the sign of Aries sits totally within the 11th house. Now, this isn't really an astrology lesson. This is what I teach in my course. So anybody who has done my course now will understand what I'm talking about. And any experienced astrologers would understand what I'm talking about. So for those of you who are not quite sure what I'm saying, just let it wash over you. But Aries, the sign of Aries sits totally within the 11th house. It's called an intercepted sign. And that makes all the planets that are in Aries intercepted. So let's say, a minute later it would have been 0902, the sun would be in Aries. So we'd end up with Mercury, Sun, and Venus as all being intercepted. And when we have intercepted planets, they really struggle to get their voices heard in the world. There's no house cusp in the sign, and it's like they don't have a way out. However, Saturn and Neptune and the node in Pisces are not intercepted. They have the 11th house cusp in their sign, so they have no problem expressing themselves in the outside world. So it's almost like they are more dominant than the Aries group in their sense of visibility. And those are all obviously in the turquoise circle, all those planets. And then if we just skim around the rest of the chart, we can see that Uranus is into the 12th house. It's approaching what we call the balance point, where there's an equal emphasis in the outside world as there is in the inner world. Jupiter is pretty close behind the AC, but it's in what we call the stress zone. So it's really not that comfortable about stepping out and, making itself known as a leader with quiet confidence, but definitely experiential confidence. And then we've got Mars is also in a bit of a stress zone. It's like, I don't really want to fight for what I want, but what else can I do but fight? And then the moon in Sagittarius is on an invert point. It's on a very inner point. So there's all this passion that is sort of like wanting to come out, but it's like it can't get it also can't get itself out in the world. The invert point means that it's all bottled up inside and it's very contained within. And then we've got Pluto is also on an invert point. So again, it's like, wanting to align ourselves with the will of God, wanting to, to move into that place of community, but it's all inside. It's like it's like it's inside, but I don't know how to bring it out. So that for me is very much the feeling for this chart. It feels stressed. It feels like I can't quite get out. And it's interesting that, isn't it? Because like Aries is the sign of birth. It's that sign of being born, something new, that initiating energy. And Pisces is about being in the other world. It's in the waters. And so it's almost like that pre-birth moment when it may be during labor, when we're still in this watery world, and it's like we can feel the pressure of having to be born, but it just feels all like tight and pressurized, and still very much in this other realm. We haven't taken our first breath yet. So then if we look at the same in the 0913 chart and go back to that red circle, now the 11th house is into Aries. And so all that Aries grouping is like, oh, they're gung-ho now. They're right on the cusp. They're like, we're off, we're fighting, Aries. It's very, let's go, and you got Sun, Mercury, and Venus. Whoa, the world's their oyster. They're off. But this then makes the Neptune-Saturn node in Pisces as intercepted. Pisces is now intercepted. Whew, that's long gone. Forgotten about them. That's gone. Hey, we're in a new world now. We've arrived. We're here. We're grounded. We've landed. And then when we start to look at the other planets, you can see that Uranus is much closer now to the 12th house. It's much stronger influence in the outside world. It's all about changing perceptions, about our physicality. But, it's at the back of the cave. You think about, a new baby. It's not really coming out in the world. But blimmin' heck, do you know it's physically there? Blimmin' heck, you're constantly tied into this physicality of this new human being who is still very much in their own little world as well. And then Mars in Cancer, it's now on the invert point. It's not on a stress point anymore. So it's this inner, this nurturing, just imagine, this drive, Mars is all about drive, and you can just imagine this baby. That's all it's driven to do is, and it comes from that very inner needing to be nurtured sense. And then the moon in Sagittarius, it too is a little bit before the invert point now. It's not quite as hidden. It's sort of like peeping out at the world. And but it's in the what we call the fixed zone of the house. So it's this working. I mean, a baby has to have this really strong desire to survive and for freedom and to explore. Sagittarius very much by exploring, so this inner need to explore, and that's its job. Fixed zone, that's its job, and that's what it's going to keep on doing. And now Pluto also is not quite as inner in the ninth house. It also is in the fixed zone. So it's also like, come on, got a job to do. Let's get on with this job to do. So this whole chart has this sort of like, we've landed and we've got a job to do. We've got a purpose, we've got a mission, and we're off. Oh, and I just realized I forgot to circle Jupiter. So let's come back to Jupiter above the ascendant. And now it's not in the stress zone. It's in the, I'm going to climb that mountain, I'm going to succeed, and I'm going to hit that goal. It's looking at its destination. It's looking at its purpose. My purpose is to be a leader. My purpose is to communicate, is to teach. Gemini has, it's all about communication. It's about gathering information, understanding. It's about gathering friends. This is about, I'm looking now for my people, for the people I resonate with, the people I communicate with. And I am going to be a leader within that group in the same way that everybody is a leader. We're all leaders looking for our tribes. And this whole tension, this whole, I don't know if I can, it's so hard, it's lifted. And it's like, we're off now, we're off on a mission. So, being an astrologer, I was very curious as to when did that shift happen between 0902 and 0913? At what point did that shift happen? And I thought it's got to be when 0 Aries lined up with the 11th house cusp. So there's no interception on either side, because at the moment, the Aries grouping is much more powerful than the Pisces grouping. Whereas in the first slide, it was the Pisces grouping that was more powerful. So we want, where are they absolutely balanced? Where is that initiation point of balance? Tried all sorts of times in between, and 05 still wasn't quite doing it. And I thought, it's going to be magical. It's going to be 0909. And there it was. I tried 09010, but nope, it had definitely moved on by then. So 0909, this is the time to have tattooed on your brain on the 20th of March. So that's 0909 if GMT. And at this point, the 0 degrees of Aries is absolutely aligned with the 11th house cusp. So you could either say that both signs are intercepted or neither sign is intercepted. It's right on that, it's on that in-breath of being born. It's that point there where the previous world and the new world are like right up, literally on the cusp of those two, which then makes that grouping equal on either side, of equal influence. And the sun becomes that sort of balance point between the two. The sun, this essence of our energy, that new spark of life. And that independence, because that moment of birth is about an independence and a new force of will coming into the world, which is very much Aries, is about that will and self-identity. This new being has come in who has no self-identity whatsoever. It's come in from the oneness. That's all it knows. And suddenly, the first thing it's told is it a boy or is it a girl? Immediately it has that initial spark of identity. It may even already have a name, but the name will be called for the first time, or pretty soon afterwards anyway, and it will be identified in that moment. So it already has these identities. It has its fingers and toes counted. Oh, it's got 5 fingers and 5 toes, on each hand. So it has another level of identity, and basically, the house of Aries lasts for 6 years, and that 6 years is our first 6 years of life, is that imprint of self-identity where we come to learn who we are. But then we forget who we were. And so this is that purity of point between where we have come from, that oneness, and the development of the ego, this development of self-identity. And if we look at the other planets, obviously are all still doing their thing, but let's have a look at them in more detail. You can see how I've circled in red the 11th house coinciding with the 0 degrees Aries, and the turquoise circle is our grouping, now balanced equally on either side of that point. Uranus is still in a pretty strong position in the 12th house. It's not far behind the 12th house cusp. And Jupiter is still in that sort of reaching zone. It hasn't reached the stress zone yet. Mars hasn't reached the stress zone yet. And the moon, it's still really in that invert point, which makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's like in that moment of birth, everything is still within, that before that first breath and you open into the world, it's still all inner, that spark of life, that drive. And Pluto is again in quite a strong working at this job, getting on with it. We've got a job to do. Before I go on with more analysis of the charts and the spring equinox, just wanted to go through what it is that I'm offering nowadays. So as usual, I always do readings, individuals, couples, families, teens, children, babies, groups. If you've got a life event coming and you want to know what it's all about, or you want to know more precisely what your life purpose is. I also do consultation. So this is more about, I don't know what decision to make. What would be the best thing for me to do? And we can do that with life choices and also with business decisions. And then, of course, I have my Star Wisdom Astrology course, which is now available just as a video package online. It takes you all the way through everything that I use when I read a chart, but just in 10 simple lessons. So it's designed for people who are very busy, and it's very creative, and it's very intuitive. And basically, I'm teaching you the language that I've just been using as I've been reading these other charts. I don't use any more than what I teach you, and it'll make much more sense of what it is that I'm saying to you. So that's the Star Wisdom Astrology course. And then I've always run creative workshops, and I also run retreats, or I can come and help co-facilitate retreats based in astrology. And of course, talks. I love doing talks, and happy to talk about astrology, spirituality, creativity, mix them all up, raise your vibration, whatever. So you can contact me through my website, which is deborahmoore.com. And there are various links when you go in there. I'm writing a travel journal at the moment because I'm traveling at the moment in the North American continent. And there's a link to my YouTube channel. There's links to my Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, where you can follow my daily posts. So do go in, deborahmoore.com. And there's also my email address if you're interested in any of these offerings. And I look forward to hearing from you. If you do follow my daily astrology tips, you know that I always use a tarot card to help me sort of zone in on what it is particularly that we're being asked to look at in these charts. And the first two I picked were the 01 and the 13. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. They're both 10s. But the 10 of wands is like this clinging, this holding on. It's like this fear of letting our power go. of actually stepping into our power, into our creativity. We're sort of hanging on to it for some reason, but that's okay. A baby has its right time to be born. It's hanging on until it's really fully ripe to then be born. But it does have to be born. It can't, it will die if it isn't born. I mean, that's a hard reality, is that we don't step into our power, it will die. We will die. Uh, you know, so we have to take on this challenge. And by 0913, well, we're well and truly saying goodbye to the old way of who we were. Like, no, we're done now. But you see, they're very happy. They're very happy to say goodbye to the old way of being. They're moving on now. They're off to new adventures. They're taking a risk. They're stepping out into the big world for something new, to create something new. And they're really happy. They're doing it really joyfully and playfully. They're off. So then I thought, well, okay, so what's the tarot card for this initiation point? How do we get from the 01 to the 13? And I got the King of Wands, which I was a little bit puzzled about to start with, because he sort of faces backwards. But he is, in a way, the most powerful of the minor arcana. That's 56 cards. He is probably the most powerful of them all, because Wands is the highest of the suits. It's the spiritual, creative suit. It's the highest vibration of the four suits. And the King is the supreme card in that suite. So it's like the master of spirituality, the master of creativity. But he is sort of facing to the past. And so this, I was sort of curious about this. And it's all, but he's ready, he's poised. This character is ready to step forward. The stick is already on the ground. It's as if he's stepping up out of that throne. He's rising up to take his place, to take, I'm using his all the time because it is, it's a king, but obviously it refers to that yang energy in all of us, is poised to stand up and assume that authority, to assume that sovereignty. And I think a lot of this sense of looking into the past is because we have to face our fear of doing this, and our fears lie in the past. There's no fear. All our fears are built on past experiences. It's also, we have to stand up in front of people who know us, and we have to have the courage to say, I've changed. I'm no longer, somebody who's a bit frightened and hiding and doesn't dare do something, or is very quiet, or is saying all the time, yes, well, I got this plan, I got that plan, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but nothing happens. It's still all gestating. Now we're being born, we have to give birth, and we have to face our past and the people who are in our past, and even our followers, and we have to say, I've changed, I'm moving on. I mean, it's been interesting doing this presentation, because I'm like, oh wow, I've changed, I've moved on from where I was in terms of doing my presentations and teaching astrology. I've moved on, we're moving into a different phase. It's new and it feels fresh, and the next step, it's more advanced to the way that I did all my previous presentations. I'm now assuming that you have some knowledge of what I'm talking about. You've been listening, some of you have been listening to me every day for 2.5 years, so you'll have information. At some level it will be percolating through to you, because I teach every day in my tips. And obviously now had 23 people go through my course, And I now have another 5 who are embarking on the video course without the coaching calls, which is really exciting. And I'm having some amazing feedback from it. People who just want to be able to understand a bit deeper what is actually going on and what is required of them, and how to best align ourselves with the magic of the stars, what I call star wisdom. So let's all bring this back together again with that focus on the 11th house about community. You know, the North Node was there. That means that that is our direction for the next few months, really, until the summer solstice, is about this initiation, this birth into something new around community. And with Jupiter, it's about us stepping up into that leadership role. Saturn is about authority, and we've got Saturn sitting there in Pisces as part of this big grouping. Pluto in Aquarius, again, it's about this empowerment through community. And that the sun now tipping over into Aries just adds that extra sense of coming from within, coming from my own personal desire. It's not just the Venus Mercury, we might just nice to talk about it. Very nice to talk about community. Lovely to talk about community. But when the sun comes in there, then it's like, okay, now I have to do something about it. And we've got that Mars in Cancer. It's really wanting to activate, to use its action for family and for care and for support. So, you know, maybe you've been feeling like, okay, community, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I can do. Do you know what? You don't have to think about anything big. You need one tiny little thing to initiate on that point of 0909. Just one little tiny thing. It could just be reaching out to a neighbor that you never speak to and saying, hi, by the way, my name is da 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 da. What's your name? Because we need to be getting on with our neighbors. We could become very dependent on them. And, you know, we want to come back to neighborhood growing food, neighborhood making energy, you know, neighborhoods making decisions. So we need to know our community. We need to know our neighborhood. We need to have a tribe that is or we need to have a tribe that is readily accessible. You know, it can't be halfway across the world because it might not be able to get there. We need physicality. We need that physicality that Uranus in Taurus. Remember, Uranus rules Aquarius and rules the 11th house. You know, it still very much has this thing about community and also about freedom. You know, that's a really big thing with Aquarius, is about freedom. We've got the moon in Sagittarius, it's about freedom too. And this because once we are operating at a community level and we're all able to engage in decisions, then we feel a lot freer, because then we feel we have autonomy. And within that community, each of us has sovereignty. Each of us is a leader within that community, but we have to step up and actually take action. We have to find our self-identity within that. And it just requires one little thing to get it going. So, you know, it may be that you're already heavily engaged in doing community stuff. Maybe there's something more, maybe there's something new, so a different position you can put yourselves in. Maybe you can initiate something new within the community you're in. But if feel you're very isolated and alone, then just make that initial reach out to someone. And it doesn't matter if they don't agree with anything that you believe in. If they live next door to you, you've got more in common with them than you have with anybody who believes all your politics, because you're next door to each other. You're sharing the same bit of energetic portal on this earth. And even if you have nothing in common, you always have one thing in common. And that is that you're both human, and you both have feelings, and you both have thoughts. And giving each other the space to listen without judgment. All that Pisces, we've still got Saturn and Neptune and the node are all in Pisces, so it's still all about compassion and knowing that we are at one with everything, with everyone, that we're all one energy. Maybe you could just take a moment to reflect and to feel this sense of being born into a new sense of self-identity. Very much to do with community, with being a leader, and gathering the people around you who you communicate with best and who you share ideas and ideals with. I love you all and look forward to seeing you at the Beltane presentation. Have an amazing time. Have an amazing spring.